You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Ryan Liatsis. Ryan is a freelance musician from the New York City area. His first experience with music was at the age of 14 when he told his dad he wanted to play guitar, but was given an old 70s guild bass. He eventually got the guitar he wanted and pretty much remained self-taught through college, playing in cover bands and original music throughout those years. After his college days, Ryan decided to invest in lessons with legendary musician Steve Kahn. It was under his wing that he was able to take his playing to the next level. In his 20s, after playing thousands of gigs and working with major artists including Matisyahu, Pedro Capo, The Machine, Jordan Rudess, and many, many more, Ryan started exploring another side of music, recording and engineering. In 2016, he landed a gig working production at Brooklyn Bowl and slowly climbed up the way to being the front-of-house engineer. He currently has a recording studio and works as a freelance guitar player, recording engineer, and producer. He is also involved in recording sync licensing and sampled music, and has even recorded pieces for video games like WWE and popular hip-hop sample libraries that can be found on websites like sounds.com and Splice. Actually, Mayor Levine, who was a previous guest on Secret Sonics, recommended I have Ryan on, and he actually made an impromptu visit on that episode also. So thank you, Mayor, for the introduction. And Ryan, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For sure, dude. So tell us a bit about how you got involved in music production.
Yeah, so the production side sort of started, like as you mentioned in my little intro there, with Brooklyn Bowl, which is in New York, Brooklyn, New York. And I just happened to land a gig doing front of house there. Or initially I started with production, just, you know, kind of being a monitor guy and a loader and a tech, and then worked my way up to being front of house guy. And that's kind of where I started to really understand about, you know, tones and compression and equalizing things, and hey, you don't just plug a guitar in and throw a mic in front of it. There's other things that happen in that process, you know?
Nice.
So that was kind of where the beginning of my production stuff.
Right, and you're originally a guitar player.
Originally a guitar player. Well, I've started on bass very first. I was 14.
as I read in the intro.
Yes, I was 14 and I had a friend who played guitar, and his dad played guitar, and he was one of my good friends, so I was always at his house, and you know, he was like, hey, I started taking lessons, I'm playing guitar, and of course, you know, went home and told my dad and my mom, I want to play guitar like my buddy Keith Pergola. And we didn't have a guitar, but my dad had an old bass of his. My dad had a family band with my uncles back in the 70s, and so he had his old bass from the 70s, brought it home one night, and then I just started noodling around on that, and I actually was a lefty first too. I picked it up and I was just playing like
really?
this.
Are you actually a lefty?
I'm ambidextrous, actually.
That's
so
funny.
I do a lot of sports things. I do a lot lefty, and so it kind of worked out. You know, eventually, I remember the first time I picked it up, I'm playing the bass, and I kind of had like some natural ability, I guess, because I could just easily fret. You know, a lot of people, they takes them some time to understand the fretting or whatever, but it always just kind of felt like pretty easy to do. And then, you know, my dad, of course, was like, well, that's great, but you're holding the bass upside down, you know? And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? And he's like, well, you just got to flip it around. You got to learn how to play righty. And I was like, meanwhile, he didn't tell me about guys like Jimi Hendrix or like people that restrung the guitar upside. You know, I would have done that if that was the case. But
oh man, your whole world would have been different if you hadn't switched.
I know. Sometimes I think, like, you know, if I stayed lefty, I could have played faster than I do now, I guess.
Do you think so?
It's possible, you know. I mean, I put a lot of work into it, so it's at this point, it's so hard to know, because now I play a guitar lefty, and it's like, you know, it's like I'm learning again for the first time, you know?
Yeah, it's like Neil Peart, like, at some point decided to relearn how to play the drums from scratch and, like, hold his sticks differently. It's like, how do you even do that when you've been doing something so well for so long, you know?
It's a lot of self-discipline.
I actually have a cousin who plays guitar, and he's a lefty, but he plays it righty. And I don't know how he does it, because I can't imagine playing lefty as like a righty. Like it wouldn't compute. Like, it doesn't make sense to me, you know?
It is a little bizarre, right?
Yeah, totally. So, did you have like an aha moment when you realized you're going to be doing this for the long haul? Like, this is what you're about.
I think so. I think I was young. And I don't want to say I was like brainwashed into music, I guess, but like I had a teacher in high school his name was Martin Soleil, incredible guitar player, and he just kind of like opened all these new doors for me, you know, like I was learning I was very into Slash and Guns N' Roses and like rock and roll. And as I said, I had some like natural kind of ability, so I was able to play like fast and loud and all that cool stuff that a 15-year-old kid wants to do. And then I had to just taken my cousin, who also started playing guitar, said that he was taking lessons at this place in Rockland County called Rockland Music. And I just went there and just inquired about just taking a couple lessons, and I wound up taking like, probably close to a year's worth of lessons with this guy my last year in high school. And then he really opened the door to like all this new music and jazz and stuff like that. And he was always like a big supporter of me, you know what I mean? And he was just like, you got to do this. You got to pursue this. You got to do this. You got to do that. And I was just like, all right. I'm young. I'm influenceable. Is that the right word? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I just kind of like, yeah. So I'd say it was around the age of 16 to 17 that, I just kind of was like, I thought this was like basically my destiny was to just play guitar. You know what I mean? Or be in the music industry in general. I just had no interest in anything else except music. And it's kind of ever since that age sort of just been like that,
Wow. And did you enjoy that kind of switch into also being like a producer engineer? Was that like what was that like for you?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I often reflect back on like when as a producer and an engineer, like I reflect back on these albums or recordings I've done and just playing in general, and I'm just like, wow, like I can't believe I used to think that sounded good, you know what I mean? And now, now being an engineer and learning this whole side of it, it's like, wow, I'm really, getting into the nitty gritty of tone and all that stuff and really trying to make things sound good, not just impress people with playing,
Right, totally.
And that was something that, I learned with my other teacher, Steve Kahn, who came in the picture a little bit later. So yeah, that's kind of the deal with that.
Nice. So tell me a bit about what you're up to these days. Like you have this big home studio that you work with a bunch of other people. There's like a commune. Tell the audience about it.
Yes, there is a commune in Pamona, New York. Well, essentially we, a group of friends of mine, this was bandmates. We lived in Nyack. We had like kind of a band house in Nyack, New York. And it was great. We had a little rehearsal spot we made in the attic and whatever. And we were on the road a lot, so we weren't always home. But it was a tiny house. There were 4 dudes living in it, And eventually I just reached an age where I was like, you know what? If I'm going to like pursue this other side of music, I can't be recording guitars in this tiny bedroom of mine and be restricted by, I can only record from the hours of 5 to 10 p.m. or whatever it is, So that was a big motivating factor to kind of get out of that situation, was that I also had all this gear that I had acquired over the years, and I wasn't really putting it to use, So another group of 4 people that are friends of mine, we said, hey, let's start looking for places, and we really lucked out, found a place with the studio in the backyard, a studio space. And it's a little, it's a little upstate.
Really lucky. That's crazy.
Yeah,
like,
for real. And it was already built, the landlord had a music studio. I think he built a music studio when he bought the house in the 90s. The house is extremely old. It's from the late 1800s, I think, or something like that. Wow. But literally the walls of our house are made of stone, so it's like it's a very old house. And then he redid it when he bought it in the 90s and built a music studio. And I've only met the landlord a handful of times, but he came and we had a drum set set up when we first met him, and he came and played drums for a couple of minutes with me, and so it was cool.
Wow, nice.
But yeah, like I said, we just kind of brought in all the gear. The place already had glass paneling and stuff, so it was an extremely, extremely lucky scenario that we stumbled upon, and we never thought we would have a place like this,
That's awesome. And so what does your workflow look like when you're working with artists in this space? How does it work?
Yeah, well, every scenario is obviously somewhat different, but for the most part, we're running a studio sort of out of our home, but it's also sort of a business for me, and I'm kind of like the engineer guy, quote unquote, of the house. So essentially, if the other roommates have given me clients and stuff like that, and what we'll do is we'll just schedule time as best as we can with the artist. And it's kind of like, I always offer my engineering services. Sometimes people have come in here and brought an engineer. But it's basically, I try to take every opportunity that I can. And it's, the hardest part is kind of scheduling sometimes with, there's a lot of people involved. But for the most part, it's like just, shoot me a message, an email or something, and then these people get in touch. I have a page with all the details about our what gear we have and all that stuff, and what DAW we're using, and all the fine details, and then we kind of just take it from there, and as I mentioned, sometimes people come here and they discover like, oh, this guy also plays guitar and he plays keys, and we should just have him do stuff. So a couple of albums recently have worked out where I'm just like, I'm not just engineering, but I'm playing and I'm producing and I'm like helping them produce the vocals and stuff like that. So that's really cool that.
Yeah, let's dig deep into that, because you were telling me like also you told me about a bit of that also before we started recording, that like even though you're originally a guitarist, you're like straight up producing, engineering, doing all these things at once. So how does that work for you? What's difficult about it? Any tactics to do it well? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I think that having now done it for maybe not full time, but like pretty often for the last 2 years, I think my biggest suggestion to any musician, engineer, whatever it is to never be rushed, never. And that's the great thing about having our own place, is that we're, you book time in here. Yeah. If you're a client, you book time, but I never try to rush people out of here. I'm always, not just for me to make more money, but encouraging them to, if we got to do another hour, so what, it's fine. And to take breaks and stuff like that. It's like those little things that people don't often talk about a lot, keep you sane in the studio.
The good coffee breaks,
Yes, exactly. I mean, obviously there's the gear side of things you could talk about all day, what technical things, which maybe we'll get into that a little later. But the biggest things that I've learned is that, it's kind of like you're putting yourself in a certain mentality, and you got to stay on that, especially if you're in the studio for 8 hours, 10 hours, you know what I mean? It's like by that 6th, 7th, 8th hour, you're like, you're drained, you're mentally exhausted. You've been sitting in a sunless room all day, you know what I mean? It's like, so, it's just staring at a screen, so it's good to, I think taking your time will make the best product, and really being relaxed and taking those breaks and
give a good, give a good vibe and schmooze it up a little bit. And
yes, exactly.
That's funny. I actually don't really do full on days anymore. I kind of like book small, like 3-hour sessions at a time. That's kind of where I'm at, like based on what based on what you're saying. Also, because now my studio is in my home and I have a son, so it's just like when he gets home from daycare, like that's it. No matter what, my day is over. I kind of do podcasts at night sometimes, like now when he's sleeping. But like my day is so squished. And the truth is, I've been doing this even before that. It's just like let's do like 3 hours, and then we'll listen back and we'll get objective again, and then we'll come back to it again. So it's kind of like it's interesting that you're saying that, because I do believe that like there's a time limit to like being super productive. But I guess taking a break is also like, it's fun to spend an entire day in the studio, right? Like there's nothing more fun than that, really.
Yeah, exactly. I've always kind of had with music, I've taken on this like kind of Frank Zappa approach, obviously because of the mustache.
For the listeners, I mentioned this also on the previous time that Ryan was on the podcast. He's got this Zappa stash that is just killing it. He jumped on the line. I was like, man, I missed that mustache. It's so good. Can I grab a screenshot? I'm just going to grab a screenshot.
Yeah, sure, go for it. Go for it. Perfect.
I'll share it on social media or something at some point.
Great. Perfect.
So tell me more about the Zappa stash.
So I've always kind of had I like to write in quantity. I don't like to compromise quality, but like I want to have, hundreds of songs. I want to have dozens of albums, you know what I mean? And because I'm just in my brain, it's just constantly working. There's always notes playing. There's always sounds happening. So I'm just like trying to get it all out and recorded. And another great part about landing this studio place is that I can pursue that a lot more easily. But as to take it back to like the 3-hour thing, it's just, I always used to think like I want to, in order to create all these thousands and dozens of albums, thousands of songs, it's like I got to just spend my life in the studio. I got to be doing these long days and whatever. But as I'm kind of growing with the engineering thing, it's I'm learning that you're going to get a better quality product, and oftentimes everything will just be less stressful if you just do like little 3-hour blocks, 4-hour blocks. Those little time chunks. Really, you can hone in on one certain thing and really dig in deep with it and get it perfect.
Yeah, I want to touch on a couple things you just said there. First of all, is it hard to balance between work and your own